Alrighty. Hey, good morning, world. Welcome to some Civil War poetry. I'm Vincent Hannum, and this is Wednesday, July the 8th, 2020. Let's see, got anyone on the chat? Anyone on the boards? Still no. I wonder how long it takes to get something like this going. Here we are on episode 7. We are going to have a lot more just based on what I know is in the book already. So let us play our first game of the day. Is the coffee hot? Just perfect. We'll see later how the mic picked up those slurps. I don't intend for that to happen, but I kind of enjoy it. Okay. It's funny. I only have one slurp or one drink each recording session. So before we now we got our first game out of the way. We want to do some plugs here. Like, subscribe, share. Tell all your friends if you are interested in Civil War, poetry, American lit, and or all the above. You know, throw the show out there. Let's see if we can pick up any traction. I mentioned this yesterday. My other show that I produce with another company called Mischief Tales. You can like and subscribe to their YouTube channel and Facebook. I have a show based on cryptozoology that is coming out this week. Tomorrow, actually. It's called Crypto Corner. And yeah, this week I'll be talking about a certain denizen of New Jersey. So you can check that out, Mischief Tales. I also wanted to go over some questions that I asked yesterday. I guess I mostly asked myself. Ooh, 3 people in the chat? Maybe no, they're not in the chat, but 5. Oh, hey, that's cool. So now it feels like I'm actually talking to people. So yesterday I asked some questions about some topics that came up. One, Alicia Hunt Rhodes. I read a quote from him yesterday. I feel like a bonehead. I didn't know who he was. I looked him up. Super famous, served in the Army of the Potomac through the whole war. And I do know the name thanks to Ken Burns' Civil War series, where he quoted him a lot. And based on yesterday's quote, I can see why. So there's that. The second thing was the origins of the term Old Dominion for Virginia. We read a poem yesterday called The Virginians of the Valley, where Old Dominion was referenced, and I thought, is there a connection? Well, it did not originate from the poem. Apparently, it's an old nickname from like the colonial times. Because apparently, Virginia was considered one of the 5 domains of the British Empire, along with like Scotland and Wales, and apparently Virginia was in there as well. And since they were the oldest colony, Old Dominion. So speaking of all that, I will go to this day in Civil War history. 1863, Nathaniel Banks's Union force took Port Hudson, Louisiana. This is where I love to remind people I'm not an expert on the Civil War. So I do not know who Nathaniel Banks is, who he is. But I know the capture of Louisiana, along with the whole Mississippi, really cut off the Confederacy, split them in 2. So Nathaniel Banks, you're doing the good work, fighting the good fight. And then our Civil War quote, just transitioning a little into some literary aspects, is from Abraham Lincoln. This one's funny. He says, "Sending armies to McClellan is like shoveling fleas across a barnyard. Not half of them to get there." So if you know anything about George B. McClellan, you can understand Lincoln's frustration there with fleas. All right, now that we are on the topic of some literature, let's open the book, Poetry of the Civil War. This book is divided into 2 halves, one the blue, one the gray. I will read 2 poems, one from either side, just to compare and contrast and maybe, hopefully, gain some insight into what and how Americans were viewing the war, at least poetically. Um, Essentially, primary source documents. So let's crack it open. And if you are new to the show, before I get into the poems themselves, I like to read the bios of the poets we featured yesterday. And yesterday, we featured Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. He wrote, obviously, our Union poem. And he was born in 1807, died in 1882. He was born in Portland, Maine. He was educated at Bowdoin College in Brunswick, where he became a professor. After later accepting an appointment at Harvard, he relocated to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and lived there the rest of his life in a house that had been occupied by George Washington during the American Revolution. Longfellow was the most famous and well loved American poet of his day. Among his more popular works are even Evangeline, A Tale of Acadie, 1847, and The Song of Hiawatha, 1855. An ardent abolitionist, Longfellow's writing on the war, indeed the remainder of his life, was overshadowed by the horrific death of his second wife from burns suffered in a fire during the second month of the conflict. Well, that started on a very high note and ended quite the opposite. But Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, I think there are some other poems from him in the book that, of course, we'll get to later on. The poem that was the Confederate side yesterday was by a fella named Francis Ore Tickner. He was born in 1822, died in 1874. He was born in Fortville, Georgia. Having earned a medical degree from the Philadelphia College of Medicine in 1842, he set up a practice as a country doctor in Columbus, Georgia. Two collections of his poetry, the poems of Frank O. Ticknor, M.D., 1879, and the poems of Francis Ore Ticknor, 1911, were published posthumously. Always happens to the good ones. I love the poems of Frank O. Ticknor, M.D. That could either be the greatest collection of poetry or the greatest primetime drama, like a poet doctor. Poet MD, Francis O. Ticknor. Maybe. Okay, so we'll get to the actual poems themselves today. The first is by another famous American literature icon, good old Herman Melville. And he wrote a poem called Shiloh, a Requiem, April 1862. Skimming lightly, wheeling still, the swallows fly low over the field in clouded days, the forest field of Shiloh. Over the field where April rain solaced the parched ones stretched in pain through the pause of night that followed the Sunday fight around the church of Shiloh. The church so lone, the log built one, that echoed to many a parting groan and natural prayer of dying foemen mingled there. Foemen at morn, but friends at eve. Fame or country least their care. What like a bullet can undeceive? But now they lie low, while over them the swallows skim, and all is hushed at Shiloh. Very nice. If you don't know, the Battle of Shiloh was sort of the first major battle of the war. It was, as Melville states, in April 1862. Um, it was the war that sort of made both sides realize that this was going to be one of the most horrifically bloody conflicts of all time. And one of those generals on the southern side, his name was Albert Sidney Johnston. He was the Lee before Lee, and he was killed at the Battle of Shiloh. I bring this up because our Confederate poem today is titled Albert Sidney Johnston. I hear again the tread of war go thundering through the land, and Puritan and Cavalier are clinching neck and hand. Round Shiloh church the furious foes have met to thrust and slay, where erst the peaceful sons of Christ were wont to kneel and pray. The wrestling of the ages shakes the hills of Tennessee, with all their echoing mounts athrob with war's wild minstrelsy. A galaxy of stars newborn round the shield of Mars, and set against the stars and stripes, the flashing stars and bars. 'Twas Albert Sidney Johnston led the columns of the gray. Like Hector on the plains of Troy, his presence fired the fray. And a dashing horse and gleaming sword spake out his royal will, as on the slopes of Shiloh field the blasts of war blew shrill. Down with the base invaders, the gray shout forth the cry. Death to presumptuous rebels, the blue ring out reply. All day the conflict rages, and yet again all day, though Grant is on the Union side, he cannot stem nor stay. They are royal race of men, these brothers face to face, their fury speaking through their guns, their frenzy in their pace. The sweeping onset of the gray bears down the sturdy blue, though Sherman and his legions are heroes through and through. Though Prentice and his gallant men are forcing Scour and Crag, they fall like sheaves before the scythes of Hardy and of Bragg. Ah, who shall tell the victor's tale when all the strife is past? When man and man in one great mold the men who strive are cast. As when the Trojan hero came from that fair city's gates, with tossing mane and flaming crest to scorn the scowling fates. His legions gather round him and madly charge and cheer, and fill the besieging armies with wild, disheveled fear. Then bares his breast unto the dart the daring spearsman sends, and dying hears his cheering foes, the wailing of his friends. So Albert Sidney Johnston, the chief of belt and scar, lay down to die at Shiloh and turned the scales of war. Now 25 years are gone, and lo, today they come, the blue and gray in proud array with throbbing fife and drum. But not as rivals, not as foes, as brothers reconciled, to twine love's fragrant roses where the thorns of hate grew wild. They tell the hero of 3 wars, the lion-hearted man, who wore his valor like a star, uncrowned American. Above his heart, serene and still, the folded stars and bars, above his head, like mother wings, the sheltering stripes and stars. Aye, 25 years, and lo, the manhood of the South has held its valor staunch and strong as at the cannon's mouth. With patient heart and silent tongue has kept its true parole, and in the conquests born of peace has crowned its battle roll. But ever while we sing of war, of courage tried and true, of heroes wed to gallant deeds, or be it gray or blue, then Albert Sidney Johnston's name shall flash before our sight, like some resplendent meteor across the somber night. America, thy sons are knit with sinews wrought of steel. They will not bend, they will not break beneath the tyrant's heel. But in the white-hot flame of love, to silken cobwebs spun, they whirl the engines of the world, all keeping time as one. Today they stand abreast and strong, who stood as foes of yore. The world leaps up to bless their feet, heaven scatters blessings o'er. Their robes are wrought of gleaming gold, their wings are freedom's own. The tramping of their conquering hosts shakes pinnacle and throne. O veterans of the blue and gray who fought on Shiloh field, the purposes of God are true, his judgment stands revealed. The pangs of war have rent the veil, and lo, his high decree. One heart, one hope, one destiny, one flag from sea to sea. And that was by Kate Brownlee Sherwood. Unlike Melville's poem to Shiloh, this one was a little longer. Great imagery, allusions to, the Odyssey and the Trojan War. Um, a very much a tone of reconciliation by the end. I'd be interested to know when that one was written. Seems a little later than 1865. Someone looking back in hindsight. But that is something we will discuss tomorrow. Hey, all right. Armando R has chatted 3 applause emojis. So thank you, Armando R, for that in the chat. Yeah, that was great. Uh, one quick thing on Shiloh, which I think speaks to Melville's poem of of a very poignant, somber, hallowed ground. And I like Melville's poem was short and poignant. The battle. So Shiloh Field lays in Southwest Tennessee. I've been there on a cold early morning. I was the only one around. There was like a mist through the trees and in the fields, and it was it was weird, but in like a in that same hallowed sense. Um, it was very meaningful. Is what I'm trying to say. And on my thumbnail on the YouTube art, there's a statue, and that statue is I took that picture of the statue at Shiloh. It's a statue dedicated to the Minnesotan armies, soldiers who fought at Shiloh. So just a little tidbit there. I'm excited to share my own personal stories. I'm excited to hear your own personal stories if you have any. Again, comment down below. I'll release this video a little later on Facebook so you can rewatch it if you'd like. Yeah, we'll see you tomorrow, folks. Thanks a lot. Take care.